It's really exciting to have everybody here for our last session in this series with our special guest, Niigaan Sinclair. It's hard to believe we're already at the end of it, but the good news is Niigaan's agreed to do another session with us starting in October that's going to be focused on Indigenous community and identity. So that's exciting. There'll be more details to follow, but we now have witnesses. It's being recorded, so I'm just letting you know. It's
Okay.
for real. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank some of the people who helped make this possible. Our partners for the whole series have been the Neighborhood Group and Toronto Southwest Local Immigration Partnership, the National Newcomer Collective for Truth and Reconciliation, and the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture for sponsoring the in-person session today. The interns from CityServe, Sudana, Evans, and McNeil, who are providing tech support with our team. So thanks to them. And Cheryl Bombery, who's doing our catering for today's meal and has done so for many events. And commiserations to those of you who are online because you're really missing out. So some of us, myself included, have struggled with territorial and land acknowledgements because they can feel performative. And so I think the last couple of sessions we decided to acknowledge, present an acknowledgement in a different way, and that's with gratitude. So by integrating a version of the Thanksgiving address, we acknowledge relationship, and we're engaged in integrating a key foundation of an Indigenous worldview that is a good beginning for living well on this land, and for many millennia has been and still is the homeland of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Huron-Wendat, Erie, Neutral, and the Métis. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our Coordinator of Reconciliation, Joan Frame.
Hi. Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Whoa, there's a lot of people here. So I have this wonderful bio about Niigaan, and I'm realizing that a lot of it is wrong because he wasn't just nominated Canadian Columnist of the Year. He won this year.
Yep.
And so there's a few things for the Winnipeg Free Press column that he does. So there's a few things in here that should probably be changed. So what I'm going to say is he has become so important to what we do here and foundational to like everything at North York Community House. Like we couldn't do it without you, and we're so pleased to always have you with us. And so it's evidence that people are signing up by the hundreds to do something on the calls to action in May and June, and we have like people attending. It's fantastic. So I mean, I'm really so delighted to have you here. And if you want to know about his bio and where he went to school, and that he was named by Maclean's magazine in 2022 as one of the most influential people in Canada, I encourage you to Google him. Because it needs to be changed for accuracy's sake. But most importantly, Niigaan is just so kind and generous with his time and energy for us. You hear him joke about he just comes here because I say so. It's not like that, and he doesn't have to do what he does for us. So just thank you so much.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks. And to be completely honest, my greatest achievement is really I meet great people when I go places. So I have friends kind of all across the country. So I was just in Iqaluit. They booked me to teach up there next year for 2 weeks, which is like what a treat that's going to be. And then like I'm off in North Van, and I meet wonderful people out in North Van, and then I'm in wherever. Anyways, but Joan's one of those people. Like I'm very lucky that I've been able to interact with people who are real leaders. And not only do I get wonderful wardrobe, this is a Joan Frame original right here. But I also, when you have friends kind of in every place, like you start to feel like the country is kind of your family. Like you kind of feel like this coast to coast to coast experience that I have. And so I'm very blessed, very, very lucky to do this work. Someone said to me just a few minutes ago, like, do you like traveling all this? Because I just did 47 out of 60 days on the road. I'm now in like, I think it's 23 of 27, like on the, like back to back kind of thing. Like no Indigenous person dreamt and hoped and wished to be spending your whole life fighting colonialism and racism and division. Like, this was not my career goal. But like, if you, what was your career goal, Niigaan? Probably to be a terrible actor, or probably to be, I don't know, like, the greatest job I ever had, server at Pizza Hut. That's my favorite job I've ever had. No job has been more fun than that. And so, like, I could have done that for the rest of my life. I would have loved to just be a server. But doing this work, I feel very, very, very lucky. Very, very, I get to go to see these great places, see wonderful people, do incredible, like, ground shaking, visionary, innovative work, like that's been done here at the North York Community House. And so I get a chance to be a part of your life, and I get to sweep in and do a little thing, and then feel like I'm part of this remarkable sort of movement that you've got here in this locus. And so really the honor is mine. So bonjour, everybody. Bonjour. It's nice to see everybody. I'm coming to you live from, I feel like I'm not my living room. But I'm doing the last session here at North York Community House. I just happened to be here, but I'm very happy that I am here because I just finished ceremony for a week out in Kettle Point. So I've been in the lodge, I've been in the bush. All my clothes smell like medicine. And so if you open my suitcase, or even if you go into my car, it just like wafts of medicine as I'm ripping down the highway. So it's been a very nice, this is kind of my re-entry into the world. And it's been a very busy day. As you can see, my phone's going off crazy because I've got this and that. And I'm literally booking everything for the fall right now. So just today alone, I've booked 3 events for in and around September 30th. And I'm very happy to say I'm going to co-anchor the national coverage on CBC again. So with Adrian Arsenault. So I'm very excited about that. I wasn't sure they liked me last time. I did it last year. And so I got rehired again. And so wonderful. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me. And I'm happy to see everybody online. So wherever you're coming from, Niigaanwewidam Omayayan, it's nice to be here. It's nice to have all the things that have brought us to this place, the good, the bad, the great, the ugly. And most importantly is I'm going to do a little thing today that's going to be like the lightning round of reconciliation. That's what I'm going to call it for today, the second half today. Because if you remember, what we've done for the past 4 sessions is we have basically, let me just pull up my slides here. Can you see that? You guys good? Yeah. We've been talking about the TRC, and we've been talking about the calls to action. I'm getting a number of questions from people wanting to talk about, for example, residential school denialism. So I have a book coming out, that's shameless self-promotion, in September. So there's a brand new book coming out with Sean Carlton and myself. We edited an anthology of essays on residential school denialism. There's lots I can say about that. I actually immediately wanted to jump into that topic, but my job is I'm going to talk about that in the fall, because like that's a whole 1 hour on the kind of crazy sickness that this country is filled with in certain national newspapers and certain political leaders, and it's really an illness. This sickness of hate and division, and that Indigenous peoples bear the brunt of it. Immigrants, newcomers, second place. Like, you guys, we're together on these kinds of moments. And I think that when we talk about denialism, we're going to talk about that in the fall. Like I said, I immediately want to jump into that issue, but I'm not going to talk about it till the fall. And then we're also going to talk about, a lot of people wanted me to speak today. I was asked to speak on LGBTQ2+, or what we call Niigaanwewidam, which are the Two-Spirit identity. I'm not certainly an expert, but I do believe that everything in Anishinaabe is queer. So the fact that I'm a speaker on Anishinaabe culture, language, tradition, like, I have to know what constitutes a Two-Spirit identity. And so I'll speak about that in the fall too. So that'll be one of the topics in the fall. And we haven't quite figured out the other two, but it'll be having something to do with citizenship and this issue of what is often referred to as pretendianism. But we'll talk really about just Indigenous sovereignty in relation to what is identity. And so we'll talk about that. And then I'm not sure what the fourth one is. If you have some ideas, if there's something you'd really like me to talk about, we can throw it in that series. It'll be in September, October. So like I said, we've been talking about the TRC this time. And the first one we talked about, which is about the first 42 calls. And if you remember how hard that was, today's even harder, because we're going to actually, what I've done is I've picked the top 10 calls between call to action 45 through 94. So today's session is going to be kind of like a avalanche of stuff at you today, which is why I'm going to do the lightning round. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a minute. But if you remember, we spent a whole session talking about education in the second session. So like, what's the role of education and the fact that the TRC calls more than half of them have to do with education, and education for kind of everybody. So we're going to touch upon that a little bit today. We're going to talk about education of civil servants. We're going to talk about education of people in like teachers, like what's the expectation of teachers, call to action 63. And so, but you know, every single call in some way has something to do with dealing with the residue of the biggest problem in the country, which is that every Canadian was taught that Indigenous peoples don't matter, and then Indigenous peoples themselves were also taught that they don't matter. So that's where you get intergenerational harm, poverty, shame for Indigenous peoples, but then those who institutionalize those ideas and create those impacts within every aspect of Canadian society, from Parliament all the way down to there was a situation in Manitoba the other day where a young boy had his hair cut, or that he was told that he looked like a girl, or those, you know, or that a young boy was bullied by his other people in his class, and a young Indigenous boy. And so my whole point is like the full range of it is that Indigenous peoples were taught they were inferior and Canadians were taught to feel superior. And that was what education really is all about, the second session. And the third session is I talked about Indigenous rights, and that one is just such a huge issue. But if you remember, that's call to action 4344. Okay, so, and today what we're going to do is we're going to do what I'm going to call the top 10 lightning round calls to action 45 through 94. Now, we're not going to be able to deal with all those calls. So if there's one specifically that's sort of burning, you know, you need to know, then let's talk about that call that you're interested in. But I'm just going to basically sort of fire a bunch of calls at you and then say, this is where we're at on this call. You remember, I said to you originally, like, one of these guys is my dad. And so I said, you know, but I don't think it's any coincidence that during that 10 years of the Justin Trudeau era, they are the biggest, most progressive steps in history when it comes to reconciliation. And you can sure see when it's another prime minister, how quickly the government changes course, how quickly the government tries to scale things back, how quickly the government disavows itself from what has been some fairly significant steps in reconciliation, and the government acts as though those things didn't happen. And so that's on the citizens of the country to remind, you know, like my dad said at the end of the TRC, remember what he said was, we have shown you the mountain, we now call upon you to do the climbing. He did not say, we have shown you the mountain and now Niigaan will climb it for you. He didn't say Justin Trudeau will climb that for you, or Wab Kinew. I don't care, whoever is the savior this week that we decide, oh, that person's the champion of reconciliation. It doesn't matter. You have to do the work. You have to hold people to account. And most importantly, know that we can't just simply cancel reconciliation or Indigenous rights or the important steps that we've made. You know, like, why would Indigenous peoples ever trust this country if a prime minister just comes in immediately and then just cancels whatever was talked about before? Like Justin Trudeau most notably apologized 6 times for what has been the harms of Canadians. Like, do those just disappear now because we've decided that we change governments or parties or whatever it might be? No, they're those moments of apology. Like, imagine if you have a relationship with somebody and then you know, they decide on a Thursday that the apology on Tuesday didn't matter. They start acting toxically and violently again. That's the point. You have to hold people to account when they say things. Why would you say them? Like, what's the point? That's where the territorial acknowledgement is all about. Like, you know, say it and then do something about it, right? Remember, it was territorial acknowledgements always have 2 phrases. One is that we see people we've been taught not to see, and then second, and the land, and then secondly, what are we going to do about it now? Like, that second phrase is the far more important than the first phrase. The first phrase, we always should have done that in the first place. Second phrase is, what are we going to do about it now that we've been, you know, we're going to change the course and that kind of thing. Now, little refresher, this is actually from your first set of slides from, you know, 8 weeks ago when we started this series. We're talking about the 94 calls. And so I'm not here to teach you about the TRC. I'm not here to to tell you about all the national events that I went to 5 of the 7 national events. And I got lots of stories about that. And I can tell you all about like hearing the stories of the Shubenacadie School out in the East Coast, or being in Vancouver and seeing the national event that where people talked about the fact that there's 203 First Nations in BC. So like the residential schools look very different as opposed to the East Coast, where there tends to be 5 or 6 reserves that all the students were farmed to one area, to one school for an entire set of 3 provinces. Like that's different. It's a different kind of way to think about it. And so reconciliation looks different in the same way. Reconciliation in Yellowknife will never look like it does in Toronto, because the proportional population is different, resources are different, and most of all, the history, the context, the issues that have come up are different. Like, for example, none of you have to worry about a former gold mine about 65 miles from where you live with about 14 stories of frozen mercury that had been used to, for the gold mine. And that if that ever unfroze, you're dead. Like, and the people will die the first. And we know this because the reason that they froze it all is because the First Nation was getting more cancers, problems in the air, birth defects, right? Like that's a very different situation than down here, but somewhat similar. You are at the site of the War of 1812. And that means that you have this kind of long history of fighting for this country. And I gave a talk the other day in Niagara, and I said to the audience there, I said, back in 1813, June 13th, 1813, I can't remember the exact, June 13th, I think it was, but it's 1813, Tecumseh turned to General Proctor. When General Proctor had taken over from Isaac Brock, and they, remember that the British would have been defeated in a weekend if it hadn't been for the Indigenous allies. The British would have been, they're outnumbered 5-1. They would have been out-resourced. The Americans would have come in. We'd all be flying American flags right now if it wasn't for Indigenous peoples. And Tecumseh turned to Proctor, who kept abandoning the Indigenous allies in battle. He'd always get scared and he'd see the Americans coming, and then he'd hear a few shots. And what Tecumseh said to General Proctor is, I am sick and tired of looking at your fat butt run away on the battlefield. What he actually said was, I don't want to see your tail anymore in your fat butt. He actually said that. And Proctor reverses, like he retreats all the way to Moravian Town. And Tecumseh says, stand with us. We will fight to the last battle on this land. This is where our ancestors are buried. This is where the Treaty of Niagara was accompanied. This is where the Covenant Chain. The British have to show some backbone. You have to stand up for this land. Like home ain't coming easy. Like you got to fight for it. And most importantly is that if a home is a home, you got to treat it like a home. And that's what Tecumseh said, is you got to stand up. Anyways, my point of it is eventually they fight at Moravian Town. They repel the Americans. Tecumseh unfortunately dies because Proctor abandons him yet again. He gets court-martialed for that. But my point of it is Daniel Smith, Alberta Premier, starts to flirt with separation. Who's the guy that fights for the country? Here's a hint. It's not Mark Carney. Although, he's doing what he can, I guess. It's Wab Kinew. It's the First Nations premier of a Canadian province who stands up and says, hey, you don't follow your own laws here. You don't just retreat when the Americans threaten you. In fact, we got to stick together. We got to double down on each other. Like, do you see any similarities? I think Toronto here is the birth of that idea. Like, that's your idea. And what are you doing here at the North York Community House? That's what you embody. We're in this together. Wherever you come, you are home now, but we got to fight for home. That's what I hope that you pick up from this series and from any of the other work that I do here. The reason I'm here is because I see the spirit of that here. Now, okay, so let's go back to what we did. Remember that we did call to action 1 through 42, and then we did 43 through 44 in session 3. Remember, education kind of covers almost every TRC call, but it needed an hour of discussion. So 43 is really what we talked about. We just spent the last session on one particular call. What is the United Nations Declaration? Why is it so important? And then what are the 46 articles? How do we employ them? And I gave you a few examples in terms of like intellectual property, citizenship, and we're going to revisit that in the fall series. We're going to talk a little bit about like if we actually had Indigenous rights recognized three things would happen immediately. The first is that we would no longer have an Indian Act. We would have to come up with something different. It would be some sort of partnership agreement, and it would be on par with the Crown. It would not be on par with a province or a municipality. It would be that we would probably have an Indigenous Parliament. That's what the Royal Commission said. We should have an Indigenous Parliament and a Canadian Parliament. And we've just dealt with all the issues of consultation. Not fully, but I think it would be a step in that direction. Some people, I can actually hear some people in my head disagreeing with me, but I think that that's a step in that direction. That's what we did in session 3, just talking about like what would it look like to have the United Nations Declaration. And then, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at calls 45 from the Royal Proclamation of the Covenant of Reconciliation all the way to 94. Now that's like impossible. That's 49 calls. I've only got we'll say 39 minutes. I'm supposed to go from, what is it, from 2:30 to 4-ish? Is that what I'm supposed to go? Or 2:30 to 3:30? And then we'll do some conversation. Okay. So we'll say I have 39 minutes. Like, what is that? That's less than a minute per call. Like, even just reading the call would be taken. So here's what I did instead is I picked 10 that I thought would be interesting to all of you, and then we'll just sort of talk about them, okay? But what I've done is I've programmed into my phone a little 90-second, we're gonna try it to see how I do. I'm gonna bet that I fail terribly. We're gonna do a little stopwatch. And I'm going to try to do 90 seconds per where we're at for each, okay? So according to that, that would then mean I finish the 10 TRC calls in about 15, 18 minutes. All right, so we'll try that. I already know I'm going to take longer than all that because I know myself too well. So the good news is that if you remember what I said way back in the first session, and I'll say it again, there are way better people than myself keeping track of this. Like for instance, we just had legislation on proposed yesterday. The Liberals are reintroducing a Trudeau era legislation on Indigenous rights to water, because there are approximately 60 or so-ish, depending on which week, which time of year we're talking about, tends to happen more in the winter time or the springtime, where there tends to be problems with water flow, systems that break down, and then the issue of drinking waters on First Nations. And so they just reintroduced, though, an Indigenous right to water, what they, in their interpretation of it anyways. And so like I've been far more engaged with that than I've been interested in like call to action 58, right? Which is the Pope apology. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it here. So my point of it is that if you go to these two websites, first is the Indigenous Watchdog. That's my uncle's website. His name's Niigaan Sinclair. You should actually have him in to speak if you like to invite him. He's a wonderful, very generous, kind. He's my dad's cousin. He's my second cousin. His daughter is one of the most innovative, important Indigenous publishers in Canada, working for Penguin, and has really shepherded in all of these incredible explosion of Indigenous literature at major Toronto publishers. And so I'm just trying to tell you, Doug's a pretty amazing guy. He does the Watchdog site. Now that Watchdog site has news stories, sort of where are we at with this call, and a huge set of information that could help you. So if there's a call that I just brush upon today, but you want to know more about it, go to Indigenous Watchdog. You'll actually see pages and pages and pages of information and links on where we at with each call. Okay. The other thing is the Yellowhead Institute, which is located at Toronto Metropolitan. Excuse me. They used to do sort of a calls to action update report. They don't do that anymore, but it's still really useful information. If you see the first 3 or 4, I can't even remember how many they did there, but they did a status update. It was Eva Jewell and Ian Mosby, 2 really great researchers, and I don't always agree with their assessment, just like I don't always agree with my uncle's assessment, but that's kind of the point. So, so remember, just whatever I say isn't the be-all, end-all on reconciliation. And I have to sort of remind media that just because I'm Murray's son, or just because I have a PhD, or just because I'm a professor, or whatever the heck it's put on me, just realize that my opinion is as legitimate as anybody else, but like I'm not the opinion. So, but you know how many times end up in a media story, Niigaan Sinclair says this, And I'm like, Niigaan Sinclair literally like he wishes he was a server at Pizza Hut. That's what he wishes he was. And so, anyways, okay. Let's start the call to action 45. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to say, so where are we at with this call? So we'll read it, and then I'm going to hit the 90-second button. You ready? So we call upon the Government of Canada on behalf of all Canadians to jointly develop with Aboriginal peoples a royal proclamation of reconciliation to be issued by the Crown. The proclamation would build on the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and the Treaty of Niagara in 1764 and reaffirm the nation-to-nation relationship between Aboriginal peoples and the Crown. Okay, so here we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, 90 seconds. Here we go. Okay, so this call would be sort of one that would be in process, but it's never really achieved any kind of like it's a very it's a large vision one, right? It's kind of like how would you then announce a new proclamation? The problem, of course, with the country is that it's based on the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which is based on the doctrine of discovery, or the Dum Dervasis, the Romanus Pontifex by the Catholic Church back in the 15th century, which basically said that Christians, when encountering non-Christians, those non-Christians have no rights. They have no land claims. They don't exist. They're basically cattle. And that means that they should just be shepherded off. And the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which is King George III, he's the one that then makes that the rule. He says, okay, I have a crown on my head. I announce that everything is mine, and that I will make reserves for my subjects. That's Indigenous peoples. That's where the reserve system comes from. And it's also a limited recognition of Indigenous ownership. So this is, a lot of people will use the Royal Proclamation of 1763 as kind of this moment where Indigenous land claims gets kind of a little tiny bit of merit. I'm not always in agreement with that, because it would be very much like announcing that we live in a house and that you are my children, and I get to declare everything that you ever get to wear, move, say, and live. And the problem, of course, with everyday Canadians is you all get to grow up and become independent voters, taxpayers, people with rights. Indigenous peoples never get to grow up. And we've always been under the Indian Act for this long period. So this is where the proclamation comes from. We should make a new proclamation. And so what the TRC is trying to do there is deal with what is the most racist fundamental law. It is that Indigenous peoples have no rights. They have no rights other than what is dictated to them by the Crown, which is always subservient positions. So this has not been done, but you would say that there is lots of elements in which there has been stuff picked up. So we talk about Bill C-15. Indigenous rights is supposed to come into concert with Canadian law. Judges don't know that. Politicians definitely don't know this, and they don't care to know. And so this is the problem, is the highest echelon of Canadian society often thinks everything is fine. And of course, remember that they've been taught the status quo, which is that Indigenous peoples are in these sort of quasi-municipality locations, and that they're under the thumb of the Canadian government, that they can never be anything more, and that you should just be happy with what you get. And people just generally don't even understand that the Indian Act is there to undermine and control every aspect of Indigenous life, from economy to dress to the language that you use. For example, ask yourself, what was the number one question when Mary Simon finished as Governor General? It wasn't like, oh, what did you accomplish? It was like, oh, do you know she didn't speak French? And that's exactly the kind of racism Indigenous peoples deal with all the time, is that we're expected to do twice the amount of work as everybody else. We're supposed to learn 2 colonial languages and just ignore that the Governor General spoke an Indigenous language for the very first time in history, which actually made the office way better. And I wrote a column which I said, I look forward to the new Governor General learning 80 Indigenous languages. She can start with Cree. And then we might say she's competent, because now the office is shown to be the best office when somebody speaks an Indigenous language. And so I'm not insulting French or English. What I'm saying is that we should probably learn the language of that started here. So we got 79 to go now, or 80 to go now. So here's my point, is that, so the Royal Proclamation hasn't been done, but I think that if anything, it's brought a cognizance and awareness to the Treaty of Niagara of 1764, which is the real document. Like, that's the real template of the country. And remember what I told you before about Tecumseh turning to General Proctor. So you asked me, you say, what do you think would give people more value, more ability to resist invasion, more ability to achieve sovereignty? Is it, we're all in this together, let's double down and fight no matter what, and struggle and be with one another. And even at the most harshest of circumstances, when the Americans are shooting, that we have to double down. That's where the Treaty of Niagara is, the covenant chain, that people have agreed to stick together and that chain will never be broken. Or is it by one group of people really doesn't matter, let's lock them onto reserves, make sure they're in poverty forever, and then absolutely blame them for their own situation? Like, what do you think is going to bring more people together? The Royal Proclamation of 1763 or a Royal Proclamation of 2026? My point of it is like, I think that there are templates that we can build this country on, and the Treaty of Niagara is one of the first. We also say other treaties as well, the Gashwantha and so on. But okay, see what I did? That was called failing on the 90-second lightning round, because that was 5 minutes. Okay, that was a total failure. All right, let's try again. Call to action 49. Okay, we call upon religious denominations and faith groups who have not already done so to repudiate concepts used to justify European sovereignty over Indigenous lands and peoples, such as the Doctrine of Discovery and Terra Nullius. Okay, so the Doctrine of Discovery is a set of papal bulls issued by the Catholic Church, Pope Nicholas V or whatever it was, way back in the day in the 15th century, and basically says that Christians are supposed to inherit the world, and non-Christians are savages, Saracens, enemies of Christ, and only fit for servitude. That's the actual wording of the this Dum Vasus or Romanus Pontifex. Anyways, doesn't matter. Here's my point: is that if the Catholic Church repudiated that particular idea, said, "Oh, that idea was a mistake," or we reverse it, or we cancel it. First of all, the Church doesn't do that. You cannot cancel the words of an infallible person, like a pope, meaning a perfect person. Like the pope, whichever pope it is, however many popes that there has been, 50 or whatever it is. Every pope, whenever they make a papal bull, which is the statement of God, you're literally like, you have to somehow reconcile all the papal bulls that have come before that. So this is a big struggle for popes, like Pope Francis, for example. Now, if we repudiated that there was an idea that the Christians, when encountering non-Christians, would not be allowed to take their lands, and we can somehow go back and reverse all the laws that have come since, and like, it would be a pretty remarkable moment. It's almost like pressing reset on the country. And then wait till I tell you, like, this was the #1 thing that was announced to Pope Francis when he came to the visit. I'm going to touch about the visit in just a minute. But now, Pope Francis, being a very visionary pope that he is, and a person who said many things during his time, and certainly noticed all the signs and protests which said, repudiate the doctrine of discovery, guess what he did when he got back to the Vatican? He actually got sick. Some people thought he had like some sort of bronchial thing, and people thought he was going to die. And what did he do when he went into hospital? He issued a whole bunch of ordinances to his staff and to do all these things in case he did die. And one of those things was repudiating the doctrine of discovery. And he is, I believe, the 14th pope to repudiate the doctrine. I got some news for you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, because the land is now held by the crown, and the crown would have to respect the church. Oh, there's an idea. Isn't that ironic? Isn't it interesting that it's Indigenous peoples who are like, hey, governments we're working with, why don't you follow the words of the church in which you say you represent, or that birthed you? Or like, this is kind of like, reminds me of the time I go to Christians and I go to churches, and I say, hey, any of you heard of this guy? It's called Jesus. Apparently you're all named after him, but like, most of you don't live the way Jesus wants you to live. And I say to Christians, I like, why is an Indigenous person walking into the building and saying, hey, like, why don't you act more Jesus-like? Wash people's feet, be kind to everybody, say things like, listen to the rocks they're singing. Like, I don't know, like, why do I have to be the person that goes around the country and say to Christians, hey, act more Christian-like? Like, why am I doing, like, why? Anyways, my point of it is that the call to action 49 is complicated, because it would require the Canadian government to recognize that the church, in repudiating that doctrine, would have a history and a role within the state. And of course, what's the number one thing that governments are trying to do, especially in the West, is give this illusion, and I say illusion intentionally, that there is a separation, that there's like that somehow the church and the state. Now, I think if you only have to listen to 3.5 seconds of any US presidential speech at any time in history to realize that's a total lie, that's an illusion. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about Trump or John F. Kennedy. Like the US is built on certain Christian ideals, and I don't even think they're really Christian. I think they call them Christian, but they're not really Christian. Certainly Jesus wouldn't be up for massacring people or taking their homes or treating people
because
who
I
are flooded
did the
up.
stupid thing, because the thing in which they were saying that it has to be centralized. So I did send it. So now I have to at least follow up.
Okay.
Follow up.
Or I was going to make a point about New Orleans.
Do it,
like,
and
it
end
seems
of
to
the
me
story.
weird that there's.
Okay, thank you. So yes, once they give me the final version with the budget, I'll send it to you. Okay.
Okay. Okay, I can still hear me. Yeah, we're still okay. Okay, we're good. Oh, so much. Like, don't fool around with that, Niigaan. Okay. Just who's ever talking, like, don't talk. So, okay. All right. So, like, my point of it is that the doctrine of discovery would have to be recognized as the foundation of Canadian law, and it is. But I don't think Canada understands that. I think Canada is under the illusion, and Canadian politicians being the worst culprits of this, that somehow magically Canada just built itself on a sense of legitimacy. Like, imagine the whole idea if you said that the doctrine of discovery would be repudiated and 14 popes have said, hey, that was a terrible idea, to then try to turn non-Christians into subjects of the state, or into the big debate in the church was, are they human? That's the Valdeloy debates of 1530. So, like, are they human, or like recognize Indigenous peoples as human? It would then unearth and break and almost explode the entire basis for the state. And these are not easy ideas. These are not easy ideas. And so notice that the calls to action are really like being ambitious. That was 6 minutes on that one. How do you think about that? So this is epic failure number 2. Okay, let's do the first one. This one's actually easy. Call to action 53. We call upon the Parliament of Canada in consultation and collaboration with Aboriginal peoples to enact legislation to establish a National Council for Reconciliation. The legislation would establish the council as an independent national oversight body with membership jointly appointed by the Government of Canada and national Aboriginal organizations, and consisting of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal members. Well, everybody, we've reached one of those 14 or so, depending on who you talk to. Some people say 12, some people say 15, but 14 or so, according to Niigaan, calls to action that would be, I guess, sort of done, or like I don't think any call is done. I think the idea that, I think I've said this before, anyone who wants to think that a call to action is completed doesn't understand how the calls to action are built. Like, there is no done. Like, this is technically is done, this one. Like, there is a National Council for Reconciliation. It's created from the Government of Canada, who selects the members. And then on top of that, they get recommendations from the National Indigenous Political Organizations. They don't get to pick them, though. It's the government who gets to pick them. So, as objective as that is, it's almost like the government appointing all the people who pick independent senators. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but technically this one's done. There is a National Council. They do provide some recommendations. Some people have also said that there's other kind of bodies that might act in this role. Like, for example, the Indigenous Advisory Board to the national projects. There is like an advisory board that then advises on these new national pipelines and dams and, energy corridors and those kinds of things. The problem, of course, is that they have no teeth. They have no ability to really do anything. And other than just acting as a consultative body, they're another layer of what I think is the biggest scam, is consultation. Consultation is a word that's thrown around by everyone from Alberta Premier Daniel Smith to Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary to Justin Trudeau to insert anyone here. They always use the term consultation. And the reason is because Section 35 of the Constitution requires the duty to consult, which requires the honor of the crown. And I hope you're noticing all of these sort of silly languages. And certainly people have a field day talking about what the honor of the crown is, right? But my point of it is that this one's technically done. There is one you can actually point to. You can go, oh, there's the National Council right there. I know people who are on it. I can say that I would never take that role. I've never been asked, but I would never take that role because what's the point? Like, what are you really doing here? And consultation used to be, until very recently, basically writing a letter to a band office on a Friday when everybody's away and saying, we've consulted with you, or we've invited you to consult. And if you don't get back to us, that's on you. And the government, I can hear my good friend Gary Ndesangari, who's the former minister, he would be arguing with me right now. And I'm here to say, I stand by what I just said. I stand by what I just said. Consultation is bureaucratic, complicated, but I have seen it done well. And I've been involved in the processes in Manitoba, particularly for what has been, for instance, the Bipole 3 line, which was not a great process, but it was a process. And you probably had a series of First Nations buy-in that you didn't see anywhere else in the country. That's the energy line that goes in Manitoba that goes feeds energy from hydro dams in Manitoba to the United States. And my point of it is that it can be done well, but it takes years. And what's the number one thing that I noticed when they did the memorandum of understanding between Mark Carney and Daniel Smith in Alberta to get that pipeline across the northern BC? That pipeline will never be built on the northern BC. It may be built on the Trans-Canada existing line as kind of an accompanying line, maybe, but I really don't think the reason, people realized why Justin Trudeau bought the pipeline back in the day. Look, I'm down the dark alley now. And they're not going to let that happen again. The reason that pipeline got built wasn't because Canada acted appropriately. It's because the pandemic happened and everybody was forced home. So everybody that was protesting, if you go back on the media, everybody were putting their body on the line out in BC, and these what was called the Little House movement. And they were literally lying their bodies in front of that eventual Trans Mountain pipeline. And people ain't going to let that happen again. Pandemic be damned. Like, they learned that the second that you give up, or the second that you step away, or the second that you focus on your family and your community, they'll find a way to get it done. And my whole point is not to be combative, but to say that that's the situation that's created when you're not listened to. So when you set up something like this, and it has no teeth, it has no role in the country other than just a shiny spot on a clickable website, it is very frustrating for many of us. And believe you me, I'm the guy that's out there. Like, I'm one of the only people on the entire body of CBC who says opinions. And my number one thing is like, I'm trying to be generous here. Like, I'm trying to think, like, how can we move forward? And this is not the way to do it. Like taking the TRC call and then creating something saying that you're done and then having no purpose in it. Like, and that's the challenge here, right? Okay, now here's another one that's done, but I'm going to show you how saying anything is done is stupid. Okay, so call to action 58. We call upon the Pope to issue an apology to survivors, their families, the communities, the Roman Catholic Church's role in the spiritual, cultural, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of First Nations, Inuit, Métis children in Catholic-run residential schools. Catholics ran about 78% of residential schools, recognized ones. We call for that apology to be similar to the 2010 apology. Okay, I don't mean to be so glossy, but I just want to get to the point. This one's, the Pope came 2022, right? Musqueam issued an apology, also issued an apology in the Vatican. And we have to remember that that's not actually the first time that a Pope has done something in that vein. There was a statement of sorrow that was given to Grand National Chief Phil Fontaine. What was it? I think it was 6 years earlier. Oh no, sorry, different, 2022, 2007, so 15 years earlier. In 2007, there was a statement of sorrow by then Pope Benedict, I believe, right? Was that Pope Benedict? And so my point of it is that like this one's technically done, but I'm not as interested in the apology. And here's why is we can say the apology was good. We can say it didn't meet its expectation. I got some news for you, everybody. Pope ain't coming back. There is no return Pope part 2. There's none of that happening. So then we have to figure out, like, what do we do with it? What do we do with the fact that we're not satisfied with it? What do we do with the fact that the Pope actually said way more interesting things than the apology? Like if you listen to the Vespers in Quebec City, you know what Pope Francis said? He said, when Indigenous peoples are in their own cultures, traditions, and languages, they are already showing the face of God. Like, boom. That means missions ain't happening anymore. Conversion is unnecessary because Indigenous peoples are already Christian, meaning that like you really have to start thinking about like what did the church do for like 500 years and what is it doing today? And like, hey, there's the call to work. That's work right there. So like what I say to everybody is anybody who ever goes to a church, I hope that you say what Pope Francis said like every day. I don't even care if you're Catholic or not. Just go say it. Like I want Christians to have, you know what's so frustrating to me? Christians don't talk about Christ. And I think I said this earlier. Like I talk more about Christ. I give a talk that says 5 reasons why Jesus is wearing an orange shirt. And what I basically do is I go through the Bible and I say, here's 5 different ways Jesus is anti-imperialist, community-based, advocates for the marginalized, and for some reason really likes taxpayers. He's like all about the taxpayers and wanting to make sure that we think about them. And then, you know, all these other things I do. Anyways, I just go through and I say, everyone, I say, here's a biblical passage. Here's a biblical passage. Why do I have to do that? People love this talk. Like I've been invited, like I did it like 3 times this past month. And now I'm doing it like 8 times in the fall. Like people love this talk, but I'm like, why am I teaching this? Every talk I start, I say the same thing. I'm like, ever have this moment where you say like, how the heck did I get here? That's how I feel every time I talk about Jesus. Like, why am I talking about this? And so this is my whole point, is that I don't think Christians spend enough time talking to each other and talking about what this thing that you do on Sundays and whether it means anything or not. Like, does it mean anything? Like, or is it just like I don't know, are the cookies that good? Like, why did you, and like, and like, anyways, and then what do you do with all these Christians that are just so violent? Like, what do you do with that? I just don't understand what you do with it. Like, they literally like murder children and they're like, oh, this is the purpose. This is what I'm like. I don't think Jesus would be on board for that one. And like, and the same thing with like this whole thing around residential schools and denialism, which I'll speak about in the fall. Like this whole like show me the bodies movement. Like, how sick are we? Like, what, like, are you that sick that you need to see what has been the genocide of this country? Like, is the evidence and all vetted by researchers and like other than unemployed people sitting in basements making up conspiracy theories to profit off of miseducation? Like, you're going to believe them? Or are you going to believe the people who have like legitimate abilities and research and been vetted and peer reviewed? And literally thousands of legitimate people have all said the same thing. Genocide happened, man. And we're all going to be like, I want to see the bodies. And like, that's my point, is like, hey, like call upon each other. And most importantly, like be nice, but be firm. And let's talk about like the fact that there is science, there is truth. And like just the second that we find truth, we decide truth doesn't exist. That's convenient. Or this is my other thing that I really get angry about. And this is where I really like Pope Francis because like, where did he spend most of his time? A lot of it with Indigenous peoples. And no surprise, he says what he says. And then suddenly Catholics go, well, popes can be human too. I'm like, ain't that convenient? Ain't that convenient on a Thursday? Like you've just said every single day popes are perfect and you're never allowed to question them. And then suddenly you get one who says Indigenous peoples are human. And now suddenly popes aren't human anymore. Or popes are human. They're fallible, right? They're faulty. They have opinions. They have agendas. And I'm just like, you don't get to just cherry pick your popes. Okay. That was definitely more than 6 minutes there. That was the little Niigaan rant. So, okay, all right, call to action 63. So call to action 63 is the #1 call that I spend the most amount of time doing. And meaning that I go around the country, coast to coast, coast, working with teachers, school divisions. Like, where is my #1 thing that if you look at my calendar between now and 2029, like booking. All the school divisions, school districts, principals, administrators. I just wrote the strategic plan for Peel District School Board, or the Indigenous Education Plan. I wrote the Indigenous Education Plan for Lakehead. I'm just telling you that like all of this goes into like schools. But I want you just to read quickly, like, what are we asking schools to do? So I will just paraphrase this because it's going to take a long time to read. But basically what it says is that we call upon the Council of Ministers of Education, because education is a provincial thing. It's not a federal thing, except for First Nations. That's a federal thing, but tends to be downloaded onto the provinces in lots of ways. And there's ways I can describe it. But anyways, #1 is we got to develop curriculum. #2 is we got to train teachers, best practices, get teachers in up to speed on working on Indigenous pedagogies, residential schools and history. And then here's the third one. We need to build student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. And then I'll go return to 3 in a second here. But then, of course, #4 is like PD. We got to do PD. So like, this is where I say to every single crowd I go to, we're actually doing call to action 63 right now. So like, I see call to action 63 as probably one of the most bought into calls in the whole country, because it kind of happens every day. Like, certain school districts with their keynote or a workshop from me, but it also is like that thing that's being done on curriculum over here, that after school program, that elders and residents initiative, the North Vancouver, there's a totem pole in front of every school, and elders from that community are certified teachers in that building. Like, there's like that's every day technically. So, so anyways, call to action 63, but I just want you to look at call to action 63.3. We need to make students that have student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. I hope that you that has alarm bells going off in you, because like, what were we doing before this? If we have to do a call to say that we need students who have intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. Now, I don't have like a way in which I can say, hey, that program is fulfilling call to action 63.3, but I know it when I see it. All right. And probably the most important thing is that when I see it, I always ask the question, like, what makes it successful? And one of the most amazing things that I have seen is that it's oftentimes that students doing it on their own. It's actually not teachers teaching it to them. It's students being put into situations in which they learn that themselves. They stand up for each other. And I often tell this story, but if you heard this story, I'll tell it to you, or repeat it. My daughter said to me, she said, "Daddy, I want to dance jingle dress at the school assembly." And I said, "I don't want you to do that, because when I was in school, it was dangerous. It was unsafe. You never show your indigeneity." And I said, "I don't want you to do it." And who asked you to do it? And she said, "My friends." And I said, "Well, what would happen if somebody did something or said something, or if teacher said something to you?" She said, "Don't worry, Daddy, my friends will get them." Now, I'm not here for violence, but I am here for people got in each other's backs. And the ability of seeing this generation who have, yes, phones, who, yes, are millennials or Gen Z or whatever we call them. There's lots to complain about this generation, but there's also the reality that this generation is doing stuff we've never even imagined. And the #1 thing, seeing each other as mattering. Putting on an orange shirt for not just one day, but actually doing it the next day. Yes, orange shirt one day, but continuing to wear that orange shirt even when there isn't an orange shirt. And if there's anybody who knows about injustice, it's a 14-year-old. Like, you don't have to explain injustice to a young person because they feel like they live it. And so there's some reason that this generation has picked up the idea that the Canadian government, while we could be proud of it at Olympic time, we can be proud of it when we stand up against whatever, also has done some atrocities. And they've been able to reconcile that. I would say that most people our generation really have difficulty with that. And I'm including myself in that. We can't figure out, oh, this country, yes, gave women the vote, yes, built a train line, yes, built, had Romeo Dallaire in Rwanda standing up for human rights and standing up for certain people. But also that, like there's blood on that flag. They didn't maple syrup on that flag. We might pretend like it's a maple syrup thing, put a big leaf in the middle of it. It's not a syrupy sweet place. It's actually a place full of blood. Like, and that doesn't mean we burn the flag though. That means we understand that the flag is more than perhaps we've been taught. And those young people, they aren't scared of that. Like they've been able to find ways, and this is where I think discussions on queerness is so important, because every young person who understands that our job isn't to think of this and this, our job is actually to think of this, and that there's a country that has a whole lot of things to offer when we know the robust and full story, the truth. So I think Call to Action 63 is exciting because it's a game changer. But I ask myself, like, why did we have to, like, why do we need that? That's the biggest reason for Call to Action 63.3, that, like, why did we have to say students should be kind to each other? Like, why do we have to say that students have to think of each other as humans and think of each other as contributing members of society? Like, what were we doing before this? Okay, Call Action 73. This is where we get into the issue of we need to find out where the children were buried. The fact is that in any country in the entire world, any place in the entire world, if I had said to you, we're going to take at least 10,000, more likely 50,000 or 70,000, depending on who you talk to, but let's say 10,000. That's the legitimate research vetted amount according to the registrations, which we know were faulty and incomplete, but we'll say 10,000. 10,000, if I say 10,000 of our citizens are going to just disappear, you'd be like, wow, we should probably figure out what happened to them. And then I'm going to tell you that a large portion of them were murdered. And then you're like, okay, well, that sounds awful. And that even sounds worse. But my point of it is, like, you'd be like, that's terrible. We should probably make sure that never happens again. And most importantly is, like, the reason that you do history is that you don't repeat it, right? Isn't that the thing? And so, like, we need to figure out what happened to these 10,000 young people. There are some of them that married off and just sort of disappeared bureaucratically, but there are many who died from starvation and poor ventilation. We can call that an accident, and then you realize that schools were actually built to be death traps, because the churches use half the money to build their church in town, and that meant dead children who couldn't breathe, right? Or starving children who were then immunocompromised and then got TB, right? Like, or we can just look at all the survivors that have said the priest murdered that kid, or the nun harmed that young person to the point of shame so much that they committed suicide. Or that situation was so dangerous in that school, kid ran away, we didn't know what happened to that kid. I'm pretty much sure they didn't make it home. And yeah, so, like, we got to look at the RCMP records. Like, here's the thing is, like, this is a national tragedy. And the fact that anybody would ever say, oh, I don't know, it's the past. Or, oh, I don't know, it's not really worth it. Or in the case of many of the government departments, oh, it's privacy. We got to make sure that we maintain privacy and free speech, and, and people are allowed to, they meant well. No, like, this isn't about a meant well situation. This is about, like, if any other situation, we would go, like, we got to find out what happened. Like, seriously, we got, like, that's on all of us. It's a harm on all of our hearts that we live in a country that still doesn't know the full story. It doesn't know the story. Anyways, so Call to Action 73 has many people who are working very hard. Kimberly Murray is running the office. I am spending time in communities, helping with searches. Many searches will take hundreds of years. Like, these children were buried inappropriately. The churches absolutely didn't want anyone to know about what happened. And then on top of that, they were also in a system in which bureaucracy was not the focus. It was harming, it was assimilation, it was spreading the Christian message across the West. Like, that was the driving force. It was not like keeping track of student 28. And student 28 was transferred 4 times by the time he was grade 6. Like, yeah, it's hard enough. So my whole point is like, we got to figure out what happens to it. We got to double down on the amount of registrations and studies and researchers and offer any information that we can. And people like Crystal Fraser and people like Ian Mosby and people like Sean Carlton and I just described to you, by the way, 2 non-Indigenous researchers, Raymond Frogner. These are people who have spent their lives trying to help us tell that story. Canadians, like these are not just Indigenous peoples. In fact, if you say to me like, "Hey, Niigaan, how much work have you done in residential schools?" I can't. It makes me want to use drugs. It makes me want to go get blitzed at the bar. Like when I go to the TRC gatherings and I would see pictures of children, like choking up right now. Like I can't do that work. Like just for me to deal with the emotions of what happened to my grandfather, the man I love more than anything, like this ain't easy. And Indigenous people should not be doing this work. Like it's traumatizing. This is traumatizing stuff. Like Canadians should be doing this friggin' work. Because it's like, and ask yourself always this thing, like, you know, there's a big complaint about this Indigenous Languages Office that spent $10 million on a conference. Canada is allowed to complain about money when it puts as much money into building the language as it did destroying it. That's when you're allowed to make a comment. Until then, shut the heck up. $10 million for a conference, it's actually not even a drop in the bucket. It's like a fraction of a drop, if anything. And that conference, many people, like, you know why it would cost $10 million? Is because people were flown in. People who had never been paid 1 penny to save their language and put their entire life for something they're never going to get paid for, built their own resources, materials, and an uphill battle against an entire society that waged war on Indigenous languages. I think the least we could do is fly them to Ottawa and put them in a nice hotel and give them some decent food and say, hey, share your information. $10 million for a conference? I think you should just shut up, Canada. You should just be happy that people are even recognizing or working with your languages office. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just read my column if you want more. This is second Niigaan rant. Okay, here's Dad. I love this picture of Dad. I love that picture of Dad. You know, Dad worked really hard in his final stage of his life to get the government as a senator to recognize that we should fund the National Centre adequately. I can give you the whole reasons why the National Centre struggled for a long time. But the National Centre is here. There's work that's done. Stephanie Scott's the head, the executive director. There's Raymond Frogner is the head researcher. The National Centre is getting a new building, but it's been a very uphill battle because you know, many Canadians see this issue as kind of done. And so they see this as something like, oh, it's the past, or we really have to focus on national projects now. And the big complaint is like, oh, well, we don't have money for, you know, this thing that is the fraction of Canadians. And when anyone ever tells you that that Canadians have budgetary problems, just ask yourself how many billions of dollars were found in 24 hours when the pandemic hit. Just ask yourself. I wrote several columns about it. I said, every time you hear that there isn't money for boil water advisories, ask yourself how the government found trillions overnight to deal with a pandemic. I'm saying, am I glad that they found trillions for that? For sure. That tells you there's a lot of money that maybe isn't talked about or is easily accessible if you have political will. And I think that the National Centre needing 10 million over 7 years was a tragedy that didn't happen until about 10 years after the center almost closed several times and has sort of regular funding. But there is a new funding development, which is developed at the University of Manitoba. And many survivors find a lot of possibility in that. And the National Centre has had its, we'll call it a turbulent time. But now we get this incredible event in Ottawa. We have a new building coming, an archive that is hopefully going to be publicly accessible at some point. There's public education initiatives, those kinds of things. But I think what's been most interesting is because of the lack of support of the National Centre, many survivors went on and then just told their story anyways. They published their own books. Phyllis Webstad, I just wrote the forward to her life story. That comes out in the fall. Like people did their own thing. Right. And I think that's the point of reconciliation is grassroots work. And which brings me to the CBC. So Call to Action 84 is weird because it's that and 85. 85 is for APTN. The TRC didn't pick specifically CBC and APTN as the only ones we should be supporting. CTV Global, whatever other network you want to describe, City, those kinds of things. But you have to realize that CBC is a lifeblood for the North. When in isolated communities, where you're not going to get commercials, like no one's going to advertise up there. You can't have a private broadcaster. Like no one's going to pay for that. And people will therefore never find out about a storm coming. They'll never find out about what their government's doing. They'll never find out, literally, when you are in Baffin Island in Iqaluit. Well, first of all, not only people watch TV anymore, but secondly, like if you don't have access to a public broadcaster, like it's literally the most important critical issue of the North. And where do you think is going to be the center of reconciliation? Communities that are higher proportional Indigenous or ones that are lesser proportional Indigenous? This is actually an investment in the country. Any investment in the North, like the university that's been up there, that is an investment in your life, because you're now going to get competency from a corner in which you don't have access to. And when we have reporters, when we have a government or people who then tell the story of the Nunavut government, which is the only government, operates on consensus, has no political parties, and it has a mobile government. Imagine if we had parliament in Calgary or Vancouver. Like, what if we didn't have it in Ontario? Don't hurt me. But like, I think there'd be very different conversations. In fact, as you know, what I've said many times is that the Center of Reconciliation ain't Toronto. It's Winnipeg. And that's not self-investment. That's just because you see things there more regularly because of the proportional population. We're all married together. We're all working together. You get the First Nations of a Canadian province in Manitoba, Treaty 1. Same thing, Saskatchewan. Same thing, Thunder Bay. My point of it is like, we need to hear more from these corners. This is an investment. This is Call to Action 84 is actually the biggest call about you, people here in Toronto, because it helps you understand that there is something outside of Toronto. Hope that doesn't offend anybody. Call to Action 92 is about business. This one is a very interesting one because it says that we need to make sure that corporate Canada works adequately, respectfully, ethically with Indigenous communities. And so this has been very fascinating to watch Call to Action. The Call to Action 92 has become the catch-all of all things business related, but it is the only call that uses the term duty to consult. That there is a requirement of appropriate consultation in Indigenous communities. And so that's fascinating because, like, why is there not one calling on the government to, arguably the United Nations Declaration call, it's 44. That one is supposed to be about recognizing Indigenous rights by a public entity, the federal government. But 92 is technically talking about the government, the business sector. It's saying that we need to make sure that the corporate sector works under the United Nations Declaration and works adequately with First Nations under those 46 articles. I can tell you though, like, making it a choice or making it an option meaning you can choose out of it. And you ask yourself, what is the purpose of business in the country, especially stakeholders? The purpose of business is profit, meaning that you have to get as much money as quickly as possible. Like, what do you think is going to be more helpful in that regard? The Canadian Council of Business says Indigenous rights will help you do better business. I'm going to guarantee to you that makes you slower business. Your efficiency may be good in the long run, but maybe not today, because the meeting's going to take 5-6 meetings to be able to get to people in which you've historically wronged them. And why the heck would you ever be trusted? De Beers, Shell Canada, Walmart. Like, why would they ever trust you? Because you've acted so inappropriately and selfishly and stakeholder centered in the past. So when you are an exploiter, there's a little rule that we have in the world. Indigenous peoples know it probably more than anyone else. It's like, fool me once, shame on George Bush never got it right, but I'll see if I get it right. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that's how Indigenous peoples feel about basically every business entity in the country. And the worst culprits, banks, resource companies, and anyone involving get-rich-quick schemes, which are Like any corporate entity that says, hey, we're going to, like, for instance, the Hudson Bay Company. We're going to come in, we're going to help build economy, we're going to help do trading posts, we're going to spread your furs all across the world. But the second that we don't make profit, we're going to leave you with a bloody mess in downtown Winnipeg, a monstrosity of a building that will leave such a construction mess. It will be more expensive to tear down than to renovate. And that's exactly how corporate America, Canada, international neoliberalism works. And that's why Call to Action 92 is so complicated, because it's like this catch-all. Everybody says, well, I'm doing Call to Action 92. I'm like, yeah, but like you did it like once and you think that you did it for a pamphlet. That's what you did it for. And so like, I have lots more stories, but I've already ranted and look at this. I'm way past time. So we're gonna do the last one. Now this is the last one, and I finally arrived at number 10. I do this because this is about you guys and what you're doing here in North York Community House. Call Action 93 is something that I think is one of the most joyous calls that, because it's a call like 63.3, like bringing intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. This one is about teaching our relatives that they're home now. This is your home. And part of being home is you got to do the dishes. You got to shovel the snow. You got to you got to do the work. Like you don't get free, nobody gets free pass here. And the people who have always said everyone's got to carry their weight, it's Indigenous peoples. And nobody's carried more weight in this country than Indigenous peoples. Like nobody. Like you ask yourself, like who's on 0.01% of the land? And then that should just tell you basically everything about how much Indigenous peoples have given up for everybody to have a house. Like just ask yourself that. And who's living in poverty? Who's living with beautiful roads and a beautiful mall right by you? Like who's doing that? And so like I just my whole point is like we don't have to really compare here, but like if anyone wants to fight with me and go Indigenous peoples get a free ride because one or two of us get to go to university, like that's just misunderstanding what is the history of the country. You just don't even know. And anybody who wants to go, oh, Indigenous people get all these free things, they get a pair of glasses. I'm like, not anymore. Now it's 50% you get your glasses paid for. And it seems like at the very least for taking all the land and putting our children through terrible experiences and then banning our languages, I think maybe a pair of glasses we should get. Like, I don't know. Like maybe, we should get a 50% off coupon. Like, how about that? Like maybe that seems a little insulting, right? And so, anyways, my point is, Call to Action 93 says that newcomers should be taught that you belong here. And probably the most important thing is that Kanata is an Indigenous word. And if you're going to be proud of that, you should know that this all comes from Indigenous peoples. Now, we're not saying English and French people didn't have important things to say. Of course they did. They listened real well. So they built democracy, multiculturalism, healthcare off those ideas. Like, they didn't like magically come up with democracy on their own, because if they had come up with stuff on their own, it would be the 1% system, the king and the pope system. That's what the Europeans had. And so like the reason that you get to vote as a newcomer, the reason that you get to be in this wonderful, amazing place where you can go to a doctor and we'll all pay for your healthcare, and that if you earn the relationship of being a part of the society, you most importantly, you say during your citizenship ceremony, I'm a treaty person, man. And I'm a person that shares relationship with Indigenous peoples. And most importantly, all of these roads that you travel are Indigenous trading routes. Every penny on every paycheck comes from Indigenous lands and resources. Every single place you go, you're going to meet, work with, be married to, be best friends with an Indigenous person. Maybe you're being spoken to by an Indigenous person right now. My whole point is like when we say like we're all in this, that's what newcomers probably know. Like ask yourself, like I always say that newcomers are so vital to the national conversation, and banning them is a travesty, because first of all, like the people banning them are also newcomers. Seems a little ironic to call yourself Indigenous and then just decide, oh, we're going to turn the faucet off now. Did you see the numbers that came out yesterday? It said about because immigration's been so strictly controlled now that we've now lost 50,000 people of our national growth or something like that. Well, what I say is that one of the most scariest things about newcomers is that they bring a sensibility of a global identity. They also bring an understanding of oppression. And it breaks my heart more than anything in the entire world that newcomers have never been taught that Indigenous peoples existed until about 5 minutes after they landed. I think it's also very difficult. I'm put into a lot of newcomers who end up in my classes because they have to take the Indigenous credit requirement at the University of Manitoba. And I say, I feel terrible because I know you didn't even know Indigenous peoples existed until about 20 minutes ago. And now we expect you to know about the 1842 Begot Commission. Like, that's kind of mean to people from Nigeria or people from the Philippines, or I think that's really harsh. But I also say, like, I guess that's just what it's going to take for you to be employable. This is what it's going to take. And so I'm here for you. Let's be generous and be kind to each other. And the way that we do that is we say that, let's talk about, like whenever I have a newcomer that says, like, I know about colonialism. Like, one of my best experiences is when I spend time with my Sri Lankan relatives, and they know colonialism. Like, like all these colonizing nations came in and then divided the Sinhalese and Tamil peoples and taught them to hate each other and that they're different and that they're oppositional. And then war breaks out. And like, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about, like, how that exists over here, what's the conversation that we can have. And then most importantly, let's ally to make sure that that stuff never happens. Like, there was a big speech recently about, and this is what I'm really going to get into trouble, so I might get banned. Here we go. Not banned here, though. I hope not. But I get in a lot of trouble when I talk about Gaza. But I wrote a column where I said, the title of my column was called "Family Fights Are the Worst Fights." They're the worst. And you know who knows that the most? It's Indigenous peoples. It's because we are family-based, community-based people. And that means that when you put people in a poverty situation, the first people that you're going to worry about is your kids. And then you put a few pennies in that situation, people are going to scramble for that. And they're probably going to feed their kids first, because desperate time calls for desperate measures. And then most importantly is people are going to turn on each other because everybody's trying to feed their kids. I don't know. Sounds pretty much like a lot of what describes is going on in, I don't like saying the Middle East. I know it's a colonial way to see it, but I don't have a better way to describe it. So what's that? West Asia. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I heard a really great speech about not calling it the Middle East because it's like this really colonial way to describe it, but I don't have a better way to describe it. So West Asia. Okay. So my point of it is like what I wrote at the column is that I think when children die, we should all pause. That's it. That's all I said. I did not go, hey, we should call out this country and this government and this president. Like, I didn't say any of that stuff. All I said is that, do we all know that people in that area of the world are pretty much all related? Everyone's like genealogically connected. They all married each other at some point. And most importantly is that when they've been taught really to see each other as very different. And then you throw a few powers, bombs, money, you throw it all in there, and people who are scrambling to try to protect themselves or feed their kids or like, and so I say Indigenous peoples deeply know about this, and I think we would have a lot to say about what's happening in Gaza. And here's what I have to say. Let's not kill kids. That's it. That's all I have to say. Like, I'm not taking a political stand. I'm just saying, let's not kill kids. People can throw October 7th at me all day. I go, I don't think that should happen either. But like, I don't think people should be at a music concert and have to face death and pain. But I also think that kids shouldn't be put into places of harm. Anyways, the number of letters I got, holy smokes. I've been told that I'm banned from synagogues. I've been told I'm anti-Semitic. And I've also been told that if I'm ever seen on the street as, by certain people, that they're going to, confront and challenge and threaten me and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, all I said was, family fights are the worst fights. And Indigenous peoples probably have a lot to say about that. And you'll find that many Indigenous peoples have lots of different things. There's a conference in Toronto just about a week ago. Harry Laforme, former justice judge, he came out and said that Mark Carney is, by not taking a stand to support Israel, is perpetuating the same colonialism Canada has always perpetuated. I said, I'm not sure I agree with that opinion, because I don't think that, I don't know if you can compare Israel and Indigenous peoples, but I think that, let's talk about it. I'd like to have a conversation about that, but I also would like to have a conversation about how Palestinians are Indigenous peoples. and they're standing on their own land, and that they deserve to live. Like, I don't think these are radical, crazy. Actually, I think this is Jesus would say this. I think Jesus would say, let's not kill kids. Anyways, this is where I start getting into a lot of trouble, and people like write letters and make little memes of Niigaan Sinclair saying that I'm anti-Israel. I'm not anti-Israel, not in any way. I'm pro. I'm not sure you say pro-life. That's probably not a great thing, but like, I'm anti-death. I'm anti-death. Is what I am, and anti-death, particularly of children, as a father. Like, I don't want anyone's child to ever go hungry or be in pain. And anyways, my whole point is I went off this one, but like, I think that it's amazing that newcomers are taught now more than they've ever been taught before. I still think that's not adequate. I don't think a little video for 3 minutes at a citizenship ceremony is enough. But I can tell you that I've spoken more citizenship ceremonies in the past 5 years than I've done ever before that. And every time I speak at one, usually the judge who's presided over for 30 years says, I'm so happy that we're doing this. And that I have the lineup. There's nothing more emotional than meeting people who have just become part of, they feel welcome, they feel like they're home, and that they shake my hand. And that somehow that me as wearing this shirt or a ribbon shirt or you having the name Niigaanwewidam makes them feeling that they're home a little bit richer. It's exactly what I learned from Ukrainians. I give a talk these days that says, Ukrainians are my people too. And that's because on the Red River, Ukrainians and Anishinaabe and Cree people, like, we all married each other. Like, go to powwow and you'll see all this Ukrainian dancing. Go to any community, you'll see all these babushkas, any Cree community. Go and spend any time with any feast anywhere, and you will see pierogies as the #1 thing that is loved by Indigenous peoples. And my whole point is like that's what it means to see people as relatives, to join together. And if people come up and shake my hand and take a selfie with me because I spoke at their citizenship ceremony, or that they now can say, hey, here's a copy of Wînipêk, or here's a copy of my book, or just you're home now. And it's because my birthday, January 7th, is Ukrainian Christmas. It was the Kowalchuk family who adopted me, loved me, and they are first-generation newcomers. Yeah. So my point is, my best friend is Kelly Kowalchuk. Best friend. Take a bullet for that guy. And so my point, if anything ever happened to me, my family couldn't take care of Sarah, I would want Kelly to take care of her. She'd probably grow up a bit more conservative, but I would be proud to have that, And then, same thing. I go to prayers on Friday. And when I go to prayers at the mosque on Friday, I never feel more Anishinaabe that week than in that moment, because it's about community. It's about putting my head on the earth, and it's about intimacy between men that I never feel in society. Intimacy with my brothers, with my uncles, and everybody cares about each other, looks after each other. And most importantly, what's the prayer about? The prayer is about the earth. The prayer is about the sky. The prayer is about the past and the future. And like, amazing. So like that's what I think that Call to Action 93 envisions for us. And I hope that this series has done this for you. I hope that I wanted to end on not a Niigaan rant, which is painful, I'm sure, at the best of times. But that I hope that you've enjoyed this series. I hope that you've had some time to learn about the TRC calls. I hope everybody online had a good few weeks that we did this together. And I hope most of all that you guys, just because I say something doesn't mean you should take it for anything other than one guy's opinion, one former Pizza Hut server's opinion. And go do your own reading now. Go do your own thinking, go do your own conversing. And people always say to me at the end, #1 question I always get is, what can I do now? What is that can I do? 2 things you can do is, you've already done it because you've sat here and you've listened and you've given me the most precious thing you can give, which is your time. But now your job is to do miigwech, which is, miigwech means I give. It doesn't mean thank you. So when we say miigwech, you offering miigwech means with the demonstration of thanks to me would be, now go do something. And what's the #1 thing you can do? Read more, think more. But #1 thing I think you can really do, talk to someone who would never, ever, ever listen to me. Like, there are people who think, oh, and it's not just me. It's like Indigenous person in power. an Indigenous person who has some kind of has this thing, like I have authority and I have privilege. I get it, right? And they, you know, people have been taught that Indigenous peoples are scary, horrible, different, oppositional people, or anti the government, or whatever they've been taught. Realize that the knowledge that you have now will be the most critical thing that the friend of yours, the uncle, the auntie, the grandparent, the son, the daughter, whatever it is, cousin, nephew, that person will need you more than ever to realize that we're all in this together. And they won't listen to me, but they will listen to you. So I would say, you want to know what to do? Go out and talk now. Go out and speak and think. And your opinion is very valuable and important and useful. And I hope that wherever you come from, that you do this. And I'm happy to do this again in the fall. So see you again in the fall. So me got you, everybody. Thanks. So now that my lightning round idea completely failed horribly, I'm happy to do a couple questions, but I know that it's almost 4, and I think there's food, and I don't want to stand in between people and food. And so, but I also hope there's coffee there. Is there coffee somewhere? I'm getting a bit of a caffeine headache here. So
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so question, comment, anybody? I like comments more than questions. I know one person who's going to be asking a question or a comment, and I wonder who it might be. What I said is at the end of all my talks now, I just go, and what does Ranjith have to say?
Question, not for you, but for everybody else.
Oh, this is perfect. Okay, you all get to be me. Okay.
Tell us or share one action item that you would do. Please share one action item that you would do after having listened to and learned from Dr. Sinclair. One action item, and it has to be an action item, not just verbal. Okay, I will read a book. Or one action item. I'm just expanding on what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want everybody to go around? It'll be like 2 hours. We'll all be here, sort of thing.
Thanks, Raji, for just picking me. This is good timing. I'm going to my niece's wedding in Sudbury this weekend, and I'm the MC of the wedding, so I get the mic. So, this is a good time, and my family is used to this, listening to me. So there might be a lineup at the bar when I'm talking, but yeah, I'll be having some conversations.
Okay.
So hi, I'm Allison. I work in outdoor education at Downsview Park. And one of the things our team has been doing and we're trying to improve on is incorporating Anishinaabe in our programming. And so, when we're using greetings, using it in Anishinaabe, when we start our day, instead of doing the traditional land acknowledgement, going outside, touching plants, talking about some of the words, incorporating them into our space. And I know we're planning in the next fall we've worked with an Indigenous knowledge keeper, and he's going to come and do some language with our education team to continue that pursuit.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Rahila Mishtak. I'm from Costi, and we are privileged to work with 163 organizations across the province who provide information and orientation services to the newcomer. So one of the things which we have been doing, and we are now more intentional about it, is to introduce the realities, facts, and challenge the myths about the Indigenous people in our curriculum. So when the newcomers come, they do not get the same understanding which is covered in most of the official curriculums in the school. They get the realities about the Indigenous people. So we are very happy that we will have outreach to all those organizations. So we are including it in our training material. We are including it in the material which they will be sharing with the newcomer. And we are very happy to receive any feedback how we can further improve the content, because we are just at the start of this journey. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Natasha. I work for Parkdale Intercultural Association. So I'm another settlement service, but I'm a teacher. And I have been teaching my students about this as much as I can. Niigaan, thank you so much for all the information because it's been very helpful for me on like how to talk about these topics. And Joan and I will also be doing an Indigenous bracelet making kind of community event at my school next week. So I'm super excited about that. And with the teachers, I've been able to start educating them on how to talk about these topics. So again, thank you so much for you and all the amazing speakers that have been here in other places because it gives us a chance to properly educate. So thank you.
Great. I don't know how much more you want to go on or if there's another question or something like that, but these are all excellent items. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to see, Carol, are there any other questions in the chat or any other questions here in the room?
Nothing in the chat. But folks, if there is anything, please raise your hand, your virtual hand, and we can get to you.
I do just quickly want to say, because I know some people are going to have to leave because we're officially at the end of our time, but I want to thank everyone for joining us. This has been extraordinary. I'm personally grateful, and I'm sure everybody else is, for all the Niigaan rounds. Rants.
Oh, that's so nice
Yeah.
of you. Some people are not happy about my rants.
I think the rants are awesome. I'm so glad we've recorded this so I can go back to the rants. But we're always thrilled to have you. As Joan said, your gift of your time and your energy when you're so in demand across the world is a huge gift to all of us. And we're really excited to welcome you back in the fall. But if there's maybe one or two more questions, I think we might be able to squeeze that in. But then there's food. So, and you've definitely earned your meal today.
I got something, and then I got to go over to a hotel because I'm on P&P tonight at 6:30, I think. So
Okay.
I screw up with the time always. I think it's 6:30. So
Okay.
so I got to get out of here, eat, and then get out of here. So
okay, so we'll wrap it up here then. Thank you once again to everybody who helped make today possible, and many thanks. Many
thanks everybody. Thanks again, and like I said, I'll be happy to see you I'll see you in the fall. But we are looking for other topics. So if you have something you really need to be addressed in the fall, and tell staff or me or something like that. So okay, Niigaan, hang out. See you later. But thanks everybody online.